Well, howdy, everyone. You all see myself, Dr. Joseph Riggio, and Mr. Jamie Smart on the screen in front of you. And we're going to spend a little time together chatting. Jamie and I are old friends and colleagues, and we've had tons of interesting conversations about all kinds of things. And I provoked this conversation with a short post that I lived that I've been doing this stuff for many years now. I'm 35 years plus into the world of NLP and hypnosis and transformational change. And developed my own methodology called the mythos self process and evolved that over many years as well. So I have my own opinions. And in this particular context, what I really wanted to have a conversation about was my firm belief, let's call it, in the fact that transformation is always ontologically based and embodied. And Jamie and I were friends for a long time, and he had an opinion that he liked my post, so he put a like up on it, and I reached out to him and talked to him about something he's really much more familiar with than I am, three Ps, but he's also gone further. And some of you may know Jamie well from his reputation in the market and the work that he's done. But I'm going to let him take over in a second and get us brought into the conversation, and we'll go from there. As we talked about, Jamie, I think that's the way to start with everyone listening in.
Well, great. Thanks, Joseph. And as people will hear as we explore the the post that you posted and that I actually shared with if I remember correctly, with a on target uh, message said, "The mind is a simulation. Reality is not. Mastery requires high fidelity feedback loops and direct engagement with reality." And when I shared that, you then reached out to me and said, "How does this square with the three principles?" Like I'm briefly characterizing what you said. I've been struggling to get on board with it, and it seems like the post that that you shared runs directly in contradiction with how
Absolutely.
with the so-called three principles. What's up with that? And I said, well, let's jump on a call, and I was thinking about what would be a great starting point, and I realized that actually the best starting point I know is something that you shared with me back in 1998 in Godalming in Surrey, when I was right at the beginning of my transformational journey. I was attending a Mythogenic Self 1 year course that you were running. And you shared with the group something from David Bohm's book, Wholeness and the Implicate Order. And if I remember correctly, it was a metaphor of a glycerin cylinder being turned with a drop of ink in it. But whether that was the specific one or not, that fascinated me, and I ended up getting the book. And Bohm's framing of the implicate order and the explicate order seems to me to have a very direct correlation with how I think about the principles. And so in this conversation, my starting point is I'd like to kind of do what I think of as a definition of terms, or sort of a loose definition of terms. And I got to say, I'm not going to speak for the three principles community, so to speak, because I find that in that community, that I've got all kinds of friends and colleagues in that community, and there's a wide breadth of what people seem to be talking about when they're talking about the principles. I also won't speak for Sydney Banks because he's not here to defend himself, but I will endeavor to interpret his work. So,
Yeah, I have to admit that I provoked that a little bit by calling the third person in the room, as I said when we were setting this up. And I said, I surely can't speak for Sid, but maybe you have a little more familiarity with his work than I do. So Sid's in the
what?
room metaphorically with us, or in spirit.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with his work, though I won't be so bold as to claim I understand what he understood, because as best I can tell, he was, bona fide enlightened, and I'm not, except to the degree that everyone is, which isn't really a claim to anything. So yeah, the starting point, if we start with David Bohm's definition, and how I like to think about this is I think of it in terms of almost like set theory.
Mhm.
that if we think of as a starting point that there exists a set of all things that can be perceived by a human nervous system and its extensions, whether those extensions are telescopes, microscopes, mathematics, whatever it might be. There is, we can assume for our purposes that there is uh, that's not the set of all things that exist,
Mhm.
that's a boundaried domain. Um, so we can also imagine, again conceptually, that there exists a set of all things that exist ipso facto.
Yeah, I think you have to get rid of the red boundary if it's a thing of all things that exist, right?
Yeah,
You get it. I get
just for
what you're doing. I'm
conceptualizing
just
purposes, but I take your point. And the thing is, they by definition. Well, I'm not going to go to by definition yet. So I'm going to suggest that from the perspective of a human nervous system, anything that exists but that is outside of the set of all things that can be perceived by a human nervous system and its extensions, we could refer to as formless.
okay.
Okay, formless
Sure.
from at least from the perspective of a human nervous
Understood.
system
Understood.
and its extensions. And everything inside the green circle we could refer to as form. And that would include uh, toasters, bottles of water, books. It would also include dancing. It would include bodily sensations. It would include concepts, beliefs, ideas, mental images, dreams. Those are all things that can be perceived by a human nervous
So
system.
let me just, since you went there,
Yeah,
what I understand is if we go back to David Bohm's work, this is the explicate order.
bingo. Everything inside the green circle is the explicate order.
And then there is the formless. The green boundary, I'm going to argue, is the implicate order. And everything between the green and the red is the super implicate order, out of which
I, I'm not familiar with the term superimplicate order. So
super
from
implicate
Bohm's,
is the basis, is the formless from which all forms arise. And
yeah, no, I just call the whole thing the implicate order following Bohm. So Bohm's call was that the explicate order, the world of form, is a special order arising from within all the fullness of the implicate order. I've got a Bohm quote to that effect, which is how I think about it. So he says, in the enfolded order, space and time are no longer, the enfolded is implicate, no longer the dominant factors determining the relationships of dependence or independence of different elements. Rather, an entirely different sort of basic connection of elements is possible, from which our ordinary notions of time and space, along with those of, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, these ordinary notions, in fact, appear in what is called the explicate or unfolded order,
right,
which is a special and distinguished form contained within the general totality of all the implicate orders.
correct,
So that I'm using that as my
perfect,
Bohmian definition.
perfect,
Okay,
right.
so on that basis, and again, just as a basis for getting a grok on the principles, I'm going to suggest that in Sid's work, the implicate order, the formless, another metaphor for that is mind, thought, and consciousness.
Okay.
Okay, they're formless. They're another word for that, for people who don't mind it, is spiritual.
Mhm.
Another word for that is God. Another word for that is mind. Um, so that's it basically. Let me see if there's anything else. Oops, I've accidentally opened another app. I think that's a good place to pause because from my perspective, Joseph, Sid's assertion is that and any time you hear Sid talking about thought, he's talking about a formless energy.
Okay. I'm
He's
good with
talking
that.
uh, and his Well, now let's cut to my work and how I talk about it. I'll riff about that a little bit, and then we'll see where we get to. Let me just stop sharing. So, how I think about it, Joseph, is that the two most valuable things a person can discover is A, how experience is being created, and B, who they really are. So, how experience is being created, and I think this is where we'll get into Bishop Berkeley and the rock and that sort of thing, is my assertion is we're living in the experience of that formless energy, which I'm calling thought, taking form in the moment. So, to make it practical, it looks to each of us, or to most of us, like as though we're looking out through our eyes at a world out there. And for practical purposes, we are. That's a useful way of relating to reality, stops you bumping into telephone poles and that sort of thing. But at a neurophysiological level, what's actually going on is data is pouring in through our senses, and then our deeper neurological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual properties are creating a guess at what's out there and generating a 3D holographic perceptual reality that, if we're fortunate, has a relatively good fit and match with actual reality. Okay? So I'm assuming that there's a reality out there. I look out my window, I see trees and cars and that sort of thing. I assume they're there, but my experience of them is being generated from within 100% of the time, no exceptions, based on live data feeds to a greater or lesser extent.
Okay,
Okay.
so I just want to be clear here because we may agree, we may not. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
First of all, for me, one of the defining principles that I work from and that everything that I operate from is that there is, in fact, an extant reality. So it's not just projection of consciousness, there's an actual extant reality. The chair I'm sitting in right
Okay.
now actually exists. It's not just me bringing it into being out of formlessness by my consciousness causing it to manifest.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing you just said, the second half of it, I'm not just bringing it into being through my da 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 da. You'll never hear me say anything even close to that, because that looks like, for instance, I'm pretty sure this was manufactured by the Evian company, which is probably owned by Coca-Cola. I've got no evidence that I'm manifesting this in real time using the power
And
of
it
thought.
really exists. Whether you,
I well, let me be more defined. Something exists, and that's something I experience using my nervous system as a bottle of water, and I'm able to drink it, and
I'm
it's
just calling it the general it. There is an it.
yeah.
There's
Yeah. Now here's the one thing that we might get hung up on. I am unable to prove scientifically that I'm not a brain in a jar. I have an experience that leads me to believe I'm having a full, rich human experience, and that I'm not a virtual reality in a virtual reality game, or that I'm not a brain in a jar. But I don't think it's possible to prove that scientifically. I think there
listen.
are limits to.
I can't prove that you exist.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I get all that, but the point is now we're going to step into the world of Balured and the idea of simulation. Are we in a simulation, or
Mhm.
does this actually exist? Are we a computer program? We can't even prove that we exist. We could be.
Exactly. That's the only point I'm making. So when you say there is an extant reality, I operate as though there is, and I assume there is, but I can't prove it.
Okay, and I accept there is the way that I accept certain things without proof. I can't prove my wife loves me, but I'm absolutely certain she does, despite the lack
Yeah,
of proof. So I
yeah,
operate in a world often where I transcend evidence.
yeah. Me too, Joseph.
Okay.
And it costs me zero psychological or emotional energy, the fact that I can't prove that there's a world out there beyond my neurophysiology.
Right, right. That's so.
I don't have
On
got
that,
no
we
issue
agree.
with that.
Right.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
agree that I
Now
can't
the
prove it.
other thing, sorry, go on.
I was going to say we agree that you can't prove it,
Yep.
and I would agree that it costs me no psychological energy whatsoever because I never think about it and I don't care.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. I'm just making sure we're on the
Yeah,
same page in
me
terms of
too. That's what I
terminology.
was doing. Right.
Now, the other word I wanted to underline was you said the word just. And I'm one of the things I've noticed is a lot of times when people hear the principles, they start inserting the word just around the place. So for instance, people will have heard people say, "Oh, that's just your thinking," which I never find is a good thing to say to anyone, even myself. Um, but that overlooks the profound creative experience that's happening each moment. Like if my assertion is correct that we're living in the moment to moment experience of an internally generated holographic reality being created based on data, uh, then that the whole process of that creative process is what I'm the pixelation of our entire reality and all five senses is being done using what I'm referring to as the principle of thought.
Okay. So let me challenge what I think is the
Go on.
fundamental reason that I reached out to you about this question of feedback loops in
Yeah.
the world. And this may be a profound misunderstanding on my part.
Mhm.
I've heard some people in the 3P world, not necessarily Sid, but the way that it's expressed sometimes is by changing your thought, you change. By
Yeah,
changing
I've got no evidence for that.
Okay, and by changing your thought, all you have to do, quote unquote, all you have to do is change your thinking, and the way you experience reality changes.
Yeah, I've got no evidence for that, and that's what to me that's an expression of the principles which sounds like it's got one foot in the CBT camp, the cognitive
Mhm,
behavioral
mhm,
therapy
mhm.
camp, and that just doesn't look legit to me. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with CBT. People can do whatever makes sense to them, but the thing that looks meaningful that Sid uh, articulated was that there are pre-existing facts to how our psychological experience is created. So if I look to your excellent quote, which was that I can't remember what it was, the mind is a simulation. Reality is not. Mastery requires high fidelity feedback loops and direct engagement with reality. Well, it seems to me that direct engagement with reality, for instance, I know you've got a background in boxing. For a boxer, direct engagement with reality and precise response to real time data and physical body signals and everything is essential. So I'm going to say that reality include the word reality in your statement includes, for instance, understanding universal principles like universal gravitation or the laws of thermodynamics or laws of planetary motion
As
or
intuitions.
well, no, rather as when humanity didn't know about those things, our ability to calibrate effectively was limited to the degree we didn't know about those things.
Okay, so I'm gonna go before that. Let's go to that
Okay,
primitive
sure.
man, because that's really where, for me, the essential conversation exists. Still, it's before we know all these things.
Hmm.
And I'm not arguing with the usefulness of knowing things. You know, I love
Yeah,
knowing things.
sure, sure.
But it's that at a fundamental level of what it is to be human, we experience the world in a particular way that is human. It's not like a bat or a cow or an amoeba.
Mhm. I agree.
And you said that, the world of form is all things that can be known to a human given the limits of their nervous system, right? So
Yeah,
human experience. In
yeah.
that human experience, there are intuitions we have without knowing how they work. So, like gravity, we
Mm.
we intuit if I let go of the object in my hand, it will fall.
Yeah.
We don't need proof.
And and just to underline that, It's a great example with gravity. You and me and everyone we know have been learning about gravity at least from the moment we were born through what the AI researchers call statistical learning. So that we interact with reality and we learn from the conscious and unconscious feedback. So, like from the first dribble that runs down our face, we're
Mhm.
learning
Mhm.
something about the nature of gravity. And that those intuitions you mentioned are informed by all that embodied learning.
That's right.
Whereas for something like germs, no one had any intuitions about germs to speak of, or relatively few people had intuitions about germs until germ theory was made popular and children then got taught to hallucinate germs.
Okay,
So, for instance,
I'm going to Wittgenstein you for a second.
go for it.
So that's just a word game.
What's just a word game?
Wittgenstein's idea, his idea in philosophical principles, was there actually are no problems in the world. There's only puzzles of language. So the idea that we have here is that when you use this idea that there was no intuitions about germs, only if we include the word germs in the conversation, there were absolutely intuitions about, for instance, if you vomit, what you ate made you sick, and I don't want to eat it. So
That's
being
true.
around you, if just watching you vomit, the smell of the vomit, all those things, signals to every other human in the environment, don't eat whatever he ate.
That's true to whatever extent those signals are perceivable. The challenge we had as we moved into the Industrial Revolution, where you had huge numbers of people moving into cities and hospitals and that sort of thing, is that the doctors and nurses and patients, for that matter, didn't have intuitions, for instance, about filthy scalpels being used to dissect corpses and then to cut umbilical cords of mothers.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm not saying that human beings didn't have any intuitions whatsoever about health until germ theory was discovered. I'm saying that there are intuitions that you and I have uh, that our great great grandparents won't have developed because they didn't know about germ
Okay.
theory. So
Again,
I'm not making
I'm
any
going to stay
claim
with I'm
to.
going to stay with your particular specific germs.
Yeah,
So I don't remember his name right now. I've lost it, but I could look it up if we needed to. The doctor who first promoted that obstetricians wash their hands between deliveries
Semmelweis.
did not know about germs. He
Yes
was
and no. Yes and no. Here's what he knew. He went on holiday. He and his lab partner
mhm,
were obsessed with trying to figure out what was causing childbed fever
right,
among
right.
mothers. Semmelweis went on holiday for a week, and when he came back, his colleague was dead.
Hmm.
And stranger still, it seemed almost like his colleague had died from childbed
Right.
fever. And Semmelweis could not figure it out. And so he was reading his partner's notes. He was going all through also, and he came across a note from him that said, such and such a day, I accidentally nicked myself with a scalpel. And then the next day he's ill, and within 3 days he's dead. And Semmelweis had an insight. He
That's
goes,
right.
there's something invisible
Intuition.
on the germs.
That's the intuition right there.
Okay, so let's define terms here. I'm going to call that what I called an insight. I'm going to call that a realization. And the nature, my take on it, Joseph, is that as human beings, we, to your point, the mind is a simulation, reality is not. We need feedback. And so, at a systemic level, we intuitively know that on the one hand, we have to make a guess about reality and run with it, even though it's provisional. And on the other hand, we need to be able to update that guess as new information is coming
Absolutely.
in.
That's the feedback.
And so, what I'm referring to as insight or realization is literally the systemic process of updating your nervous system to bring it more closely into alignment with reality. You call it
We're in
intuition.
agreement. We have no disagreement
Okay.
about that.
So now, when Sid is talking about all you need is to change your thinking and that sort of thing. What he's specifically talking about is the incremental shift that takes a person from one state of mind, from the increment of transformation, you could say, is a realization. So it's not a change in conscious thinking. It's what I refer to as fresh new perceptual reality that's arisen, I'm going to say, from the formless. It didn't come from anywhere you can point at. It's a
It can't.
it's
And this is where, okay. We're now at the wall. We're now
Yeah,
at the point where I'm going to disagree, which is
go for
it
it.
did come from the direct sensory engagement with reality. That's that feedback loop. That's my whole point. You can intuit on a mental level all you want. You can project and speculate and imagine and
Yep.
fantasize, and until you come in contact with reality through the magnificence and magic of human sensorial experience, all of that stuff is just, you know, mental
Masturbation.
masturbation, to use the term.
I'm totally with you. So let me be really, really specific. It looks to me like as human beings, we have this power of realization to bring us fresh new perceptual reality, to align us better with actual reality, whatever that
But
is.
only when we bump up against it.
Well, yeah, but there are many ways that you can bump up against reality. So I'll give you, for instance, I'll coach people on regularly coach people who have been struggling in some way. Now, it's my assertion that they're struggling because they're locked in an old map of reality. By map, I mean the full internal, their embodied understanding of the world, which is out of step with actual reality. And my process for coaching people in that situation is I basically get them into what I call an insight friendly space. And given that opportunity, they spawn fresh new perceptual reality that's closer to actual reality. Life has given them what they needed. So, in a very real way, the reason they've been struggling is they're bumping up against actual reality in some way that they can't move forward with. And it doesn't take a lot for life to bring them something fresh and new that allows them to move forward.
Right. And
Now, it's not conceptual or cognitive. It's systemic. It's whole form as you it arrives all at once, and it's to me it's more akin to a software update for your computer than it is to some new idea or thought.
okay. And again, you probably heard this way back when we first met. For me, this was one of the challenges I had with NLP. But you and I both come from an NLP background
Yep,
a long time ago. And I still love NLP, and it has very, very powerful applications, as by the way, I think 3P does. Powerful
sure.
applications. I think they're limited in the sense of they don't see the full picture of what it is to be human. I think when a person transcends to enlightenment, sometimes they forget what it's like not to be enlightened.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and so,
I'm in no danger of that, fortunately.
so they leave out this full picture of what it is to be human. So in NLP, the mechanism is often linguistic. I'm going to change the language and processing of language and descriptions and labels and narrative that you have in your head, and that's going to change everything. And for what it works for, it does a great job,
Yeah.
fantastic job. So the challenge I have here is that the confrontation with reality is sensorial. It's based in sensation. And this person who's struggling, it's not that they're bumping up against reality and don't know what to do about it. It's that they don't notice they're bumping up against reality. They don't have the sensory update equipment. So therefore, I don't think it's a software update. I think it's a hardware update. I think you have to increase the level of their sensorial sensitivity so that they can notice what they're bumping up against. So I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
11 years old, I was in Newark, New Jersey, getting in fights all the time. And you'd win some, you'd lose some. And when you lost, it hurt. right?
Mm.
So I didn't want to lose so much. I didn't like the losing part. So I'm trying to
Understandable.
convince my father. You got to remember, this is the 1970s, and David Carradine is about to explode with his Kung Fu series. But prior to that, this guy Bruce Lee showed up on a TV show called The Green Hornet and played Kato,
Mm.
who did all these amazing things with these strange ways of fighting. That again, in the 1970s, Americans were not familiar with
Sure.
karate and jujitsu and judo and all these Oriental arts. And in any case, I wanted to learn to do this, so I said I'm going to learn. My father, decided that he didn't want to at that point bring me to karate, but we started doing some boxing stuff, so some of the Western approach, right? And years later, going to fast forward 50 years, 55 years, I'm studying with a guy named Al Ridenour, who was at that time practicing something called guided chaos and eventually uh, evolved that into something he now calls warrior flow. And the whole point is, in this particular approach to martial engagement, the whole premise is you're using movement in a way that is much, much more sensitized. You're playing with temporal form, how you move in space and modify your sense of time in relation to another person based upon feedback. But in order to do that, you have to train the sensitivity level you have. You have to
Mhm.
increase your ability to hold balance in very fine and minute ways. You have to understand the relationship between where you are and where another person is, the proximetrics, so you can move through that space with incredibly precise timing. And it's not just I have to think differently. My body had to learn to do things differently.
Sure. But I mean, same goes. I'm in the process of learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
Sure.
at
You
the
know the art
moment.
well,
And I am, I don't know the art nearly well enough. And I have a lot to learn. And
as we all
it's,
do.
it's clear to me that the process of going to jujitsu classes and rolling and grappling and all of that is making changes at a psychological and neurophysiological level. But I'm putting very, very little attention on changing my thinking in any way. Just the process of going and training and that sort of thing, moving my body, adjusting my weight, paying attention to different things is creating the conditions for insights that are updating my nervous
So
system.
have you rolled with really good players?
I've rolled with 100% players who are better than me,
Okay.
um,
But if you
and
rolled,
certainly some of them are a lot better than me.
okay. So if you were really, really good players, what you notice very quickly is they feel balance differently than you do.
Sure.
They feel balance. They don't think balance.
Yeah.
Haven't changed their thought.
That well,
Change the
and
ability of their body to notice balance in a way that you and I, who don't play at that level, don't notice
yeah,
balance.
it makes total sense to me. The examples I can give personal examples of would include skiing, where it's a felt experience. It's nothing to do with what I'm consciously thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Playing guitar, where the pressure I place on the fretboard and with my right hand and that sort of thing, it's not a cognitive thing. But also,
So you've got
uh,
to upgrade the hardware. You've got to upgrade the hardware, not just
yeah,
the
and
software.
I'm not saying anything at all about nothing. It looks to me like there are certain mastery skill sets which can only be developed with time on the mat.
That's right.
That doesn't look in
And what
any way
changes is
inconsistent.
the physical response you have in the world, which precedes, I'm going to, and this is the whole argument I have, I think. It precedes any mental engagement whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm with you. So here's the piece that I think gets it comes into the mix somewhere along the way. It's this that at some point, as for instance, if you're in the process of developing a mastery skill set, in the process of developing that in any domain, your embodied understanding of reality will get updated along the way. Now, I'm not saying what sequence that happens in. As best I can tell, when I'm rolling or playing the guitar, the activity itself creates the conditions for the relevant upgrades to
Agreed.
happen as and when it
That's
does.
right.
I got nothing to say about that. Um, There's one piece that might be an interesting addition to this from the direction of change work. When I'm doing change work with someone, it seems to me like what I notice happening is that when a shift happens, so the process of leading someone into an insight friendly space and creating the conditions for insight is typically there's quite a profound relaxation internally for both the other person and for me.
Mhm.
And often there will be habits of muscular tightening and relaxation and things, and I'll see emotions coming up, and I'll notice where their body is tensing to try and restrict it and that sort of thing. And the thing I say probably more than anything else is keep
Mhm.
breathing. And what I see is the expression of a built-in, for lack of a better word, healing process happening to clear out of the way various, whether it's traumas or habits of thinking and feeling and that sort of thing, and something new emerges. So the the thing I was going to say, Joseph, and this may be a, a curveball, but it seems to me that the process of doing change work from a principles perspective is fundamentally energy work. It's
I
about
think if we define it, we may agree.
it's about stepping into or creating or uh, fulminating a field, if you like, which is a very different energetic space than the person's ordinary method of experiencing themselves
I
in the
would agree.
world.
There's definitely, I agree that that absolutely is true. Not that it's the only way or the way, but definitely
No,
true. Totally
like,
agree.
and I don't find myself in that field when I'm rolling on the BJJ
Right.
mats, but the upgrades happen anyway. And Viktor Frankl famously was being death marched across a frozen field in bare feet in Germany. He fell to the ground, was going to be beaten to death, and then had a profound insight that got him through the war, and he ended up founding the field of logotherapy. So even though I talk about creating the conditions for insight, it's really more like stacking the deck in the favor of realization,
Listen,
because realization is unconditional.
I trained with this guy that I mentioned, Al Ridnour,
Mhm.
and this is a martial art, and it's a martial art that's designed to be combative in the sense it's not sport. This is self defense. This is
Right.
if somebody's trying to hurt you, do what's necessary to make sure that you survive, even if they don't. I mean, I'm going to be very
Yeah.
blunt about it.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful art because if you can imagine what you've probably seen Tai Chi players do, those forms they use and the movement. If you imagine two people doing that simultaneously, those forms in relation to one another, right? Not push hands, but actually
Mm.
moving through the forms and doing these kinds of things in relation to the other person's movement to negate their movement of attack. And as the saying goes within the art, to make yourself unavoidable, right, and unavailable. So they can't touch you as you're hitting them.
Yeah.
Well, I'm training with Al, and what he does, which is brilliant, and I'm going to step into another idea in a second, is sets up the conditions whereby which I can't help but to respond the way he wants me to.
Mm.
I don't know that I am.
Yeah.
Then what happens is he does something, I negate it, and I strike.
Yeah.
And I hit him. And he allows me to, because if he doesn't want me to, believe me, I don't. So he
Yeah.
lets me hit him, basically. He sets me up. Not, he doesn't let me hit him. He sets me up to hit him, right? And then, as he says, you stood there for a moment, admiring yourself. And the way I know that he's noticed I've been admiring myself is I get hit,
Yeah.
right? So the thought in this particular case interrupts my ability to perform. When
Yeah.
I'm
Or
not
a
thinking, I
thought.
continue to flow.
Yeah.
Now, if you know a guy named James Gibson, J. Gibson, if you want to be the whole thing,
I don't.
okay, he developed something called the theory of affordances. And basically, this theory is brilliant. It says reality affords us the opportunity to interact with it in very particular ways. So you had a Evian bottle. I have a coffee cup, a
Mm.
plastic, cardboard cup. This affords me the ability to grab it in a particular way because of its
Sure.
form, its shape. I can't grab it like this.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It affords me the ability to do this. It affords me the ability because it's got an opening to put something in it,
Mhm.
whether that's solid or liquid or granular or whatever, right? It affords me the ability because there's an opening and there's an opening in this cap to take that material that's in there out of it. So it affords me all these things I can do with this object. So the world creates these affordances. And master trainers, master teachers, master mentors, what they do to accelerate the ability of someone to interact with reality more closely to how reality is extant, this form it is beyond our comprehension of it, is they set up the conditions that afford the individual the opportunity to interact in a particular way, and
Yeah.
sometimes only in one particular way, that it's
Yeah.
the idealized way to respond in that moment to create the outcome that's intended.
Yeah.
And that's what Al was doing with me. He
Yeah.
afforded me a particular movement of his body and relationship to mine as I was in motion so that I couldn't help but to negate what he did and strike him, which is what he
Mhm.
was trying to get me to do. Now my nervous system has learned that. I don't
Yeah.
know it. By the way, I don't know what I just did. I have no idea what just happened. I cannot replay it in memory. I can't understand how I got his hand out of the way. I don't know how I made the decision to strike him. But the next time he runs that pattern again, because he does know, right? My body does the right thing. And now he runs
Yeah.
it 6 times, 10 times, 12 times. My body's really got it. And it's doing it
Yeah.
so fast that I actually begin now to catch it. Now I begin to get what I'm doing, and my performance drops.
Mm.
In that moment, my performance goes down. It doesn't go up because
Yeah.
now I'm in the process of observing myself doing what it is that's happening. And until I let go of that again, and because Al's as good a teacher as he is, he sets up different affordances now,
Mm.
which don't allow that thing to work the way it did when I ran it the way I was running it. And now I have to modify it a little bit, but again, out of consciousness, out
Yeah.
of awareness. And what I use the word consciousness here, I mean awareness, out of my
Yeah.
conscious awareness of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And through these affordances, he's updating the hardware. The
Mhm.
nervous system is updating long before I have any conscious cognitive awareness of any of this happening.
It makes total sense to me. And I think the term conscious cognitive awareness is crucial here, Joseph, because my assertion to you is that 100% of my work with clients leveraging the principles in those interactions has nothing to do with conscious cognitive awareness.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to uh, I'm not trying to have anyone grasp any particular ideas. I'm not trying to have them get any theories or concepts or anything like that. What I'm looking to do is to uh, lead their nervous system into a particular kind of space where the system will update. And now the reason I mentioned the thing about energy work, something you said is that transformational change is always ontologically based and is embodied. And I would agree 100%. So as I mentioned, my way of framing this is the two most valuable things a person can discover are how experience is created, which is this statement we're living in the experience
We
of
agree.
this internally generated thing, and who they really are.
Absolutely.
Now, the who they really are piece is, from my perspective, if the if what we're talking about as the principles, as in uh, everything within the red circle that shouldn't exist, everything that's in there
Right.
is the principles, because the principles, Sid would have said, the principles are the energy behind all things, whether in form or formless. So it looks to me that what we might refer to as soul is the spark of that non-local totality that resides at the heart of the person's being. So there's a line from Teilhard de Chardin that I bastardize, which is we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 8 billion human experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And who you really are is that one spiritual being, that formless, non-local, the spark of that non-local energy that exists within each person. Now, what I've seen, Joseph, is that that spark is an aspect of reality in its deepest sense, just like the fact about how experience is creating, or what I'm asserting is a fact, is an aspect of reality that a person can have insight into. And what I've observed and experienced is that when a person has realizations, i.e., a nervous system update about either of those facts, transformational change happens.
I agree.
Now, I'm not saying that's the only way transformational change can
I
happen.
might argue it is.
Well, it might be.
I might
That
be the one
might
who
be
argues
what
for it.
happens. That might be what happens when I'm rolling. It's just I'm so busy rolling I don't notice it.
Right. Like, it's not just that. Here's the, and this is kind of a paradoxical truth. Right. By the way, talk about what you can't prove, that we're one spirit having a billion human
I know, right?
experiences,
Yeah,
right? And also your unspoken confession that you're a man of faith. So
indeed.
so the thing is that this idea, the fundamental idea, the second piece you point to, is knowing who you are,
Mm,
right? What I'm calling the ontological awareness. That piece, when you roll and you get better, has become different. Who you are is now something else. So there's an essential truthness of you, I'm going to use that word, that never changes. There's an unchanging
yeah.
aspect that Jamie's incarnation, the incarnation of Jamie Smart, will never be different than that incarnation of Jamie Smart. Jamie Smart is always going to be that thing,
Mm,
right? We can label it any way we want. You can change your name next week to Sue
yeah,
Malone, and you'll still have that incarnate, that will be there.
yeah.
And you also simultaneously, without changing, become different in the sense that you now know yourself as someone who can do the thing you didn't do yesterday.
I've got a very personal example of this, which uh, will link in nicely. In a long time ago, probably 2006, I went to Ireland to do a Krav Maga course with a guy
Mhm.
called Patrick Comiskey, who's trained like 80 or 90,000 people at this point. He's a
Not all
brilliant,
at once.
not all at once.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's trained the Garda and all kinds. But he's created this course, which is just a 2-day course that he teaches anyone. That's basically a stay out of trouble or get out of trouble
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
Avoid trouble or fight your way out of it if you can't. And I had never been a fighter as a kid growing up, and had always had that thing that I think a lot of guys have in our society of just having the sense that they probably couldn't take care of themselves in a fight if
Understood.
something
Yep,
happened.
sure.
And so I went on this course. And at the end of the first day, which was exhausting, he really put us through our paces. I came home and I went to my hotel room and I looked in the mirror and I had one of those moments of insight, which was the me I had thought myself to be up until that morning when I went on that course was updated with a more accurate presentation of who I am, what I've got going for, and what hundreds of thousands of years of evolution will do for an animal with teeth and claws. And it looks to me like that there's this process for all of us to a greater or lesser degree of bringing our self-image, you could say, at the most embodied level, more closely into alignment with reality.
Hmm.
And that core essence of self, which we might call soul or true identity, whatever you want to call it, it never changes. But the more closely we identify with that blueprint, that truth of our being, it looks to me like the more functional we are in the world.
Okay. So I'm going to say something that another great teacher of mine, who you've heard mentioned many times, Roy Frazier, taught me very early on. And it was, he used the terminology, which is obviously very close to what you're talking about, to bring the formless into form. That was a phrase he would use. And over the years, I've kind of updated the way I think about it, not necessarily improved on it, but changed the language and way I think about it a little. That when you're accessing the totality of the ontology of being, so the totality of who you are, the completeness of being, all possibilities become available to you. So you access the domain of all possibilities. And from that, you can then draw from all possibilities into manifest experience, what's realized, your idea of realization. And it's a word I use a lot, by the way. The things that you want to see as experienced or unfolded, in Boehm's terms, explicated in the world. And this is the magic of transformation, is the ability to choose to bring into extant form that which always existed in the domain of possibilities, but it had never been realized, maybe at least by you, maybe realized by someone else. But now you're
Mm.
realizing them by what I'm going to call will. Through intentionality, you organize yourself. The nervous system is now organized to notice for what's in the domain of the extant reality we operate in, such that we actually are experiencing those things that are necessary for us to bring them into realization, into manifest form, right? And I'm going to change topic in a second, but I want to let you respond. So,
Well, that just looks absolutely legit to me. And that one of the things I've noticed is that the choice, the willful choice into, okay, this is the direction I'm going to go, this is what I'm going to bring into being. That doesn't mean that courage won't be required or that it won't be necessary to do difficult things or anything like that. But there's something about knowing who you really are and what the right path is for you and what you've chosen that brings a whole new domain of resources into connection.
absolutely, absolutely. Both
Yeah.
of us, have probably spent a little bit of time, at least, delving into the annals of Joseph Campbell's work,
Yeah.
and that he explicates that quite well in that idea, right? So where I wanted to kind of make this shift, because I'd like to get it on here before we end the call, is as a person who works in the domain of transformation, right? So I call myself these days a transformation architect. I architect transformation, right? Um, it is interesting to me and important that I think of those things that I do with clients to minimize the time and effort required for them to experience what they're paying me to help them get to.
Mhm.
Right. So I think in terms of this idea of affordances, how can I be with them in such a way? What do I have to have incorporated first so that I can be with them in such a way that in my presence, they can't help but to experience themselves as they desire and we contracted for?
Mm.
That to me is the work of the change artist, is to embody the change in such a way that the person in front of you can't help but to have the experience that they want to have of themselves, that they're paying you to help them get to.
That makes total sense to me. And that looks to me like, in my own way, the thing I've put my attention on as well. And so the form that takes in my work and my own neurophysiology is different from the form it takes in yours, but it looks like a similar endeavor.
Yeah, the mechanism, the externalized mechanism of that, to me is almost irrelevant. And I
Mhm.
say that if somebody does CBD or somebody does, dog training, I don't care what they do, and the people who engage with them find themselves being different as a result, and in a desirable way, and an intentional way, that they're different in a desirable and way they intended to be. I don't care what the mechanism is.
Yeah.
Do it any way you want. But that person, whoever they are, the therapist or the coach or the dog trainer, has to have first embodied a way of being in the world that has become possible.
It's funny, Joseph. I totally agree. And from my perspective, it's all about what you've embodied and are living and working from, and nothing to do with concepts and beliefs and ideas, or minimally to do with any
Right.
concepts and beliefs and ideas anyway. But the other thing is, you mentioned Joseph Campbell, and one of the things I've seen is, as I've immersed myself more and more deeply in Sydney Banks's work and gone on that journey, I've seen more and more the relevance of Joseph Campbell's work. So I I'm probably very slightly more agreeable than you, but I didn't come into this conversation with an aim to get agreement or alignment of our models. But I don't see much to disagree with here.
I agree. And I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily think, again, the reason I reached out to you was to clarify my misunderstandings, not to prove you were wrong.
And similarly, like as you know, I have great respect for you, and I'm very grateful for the things I learned from you very early in my
Thank
journey,
you. Yeah.
and they continue to be relevant and interesting and valuable distinctions for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Going to a particular comment you said where you spend very little time actually, I forget the exact way you phrased it, but essentially teaching or caring about whether the people you're working with get concepts.
Mm.
It's not really what you're aiming at. I will tell you, and you've sat in a room with me for a number of hours, so you understand this better than most people who are listening, probably. Most of the language I use in a room is done for obfuscation and misdirection. It's not.
Exactly. People will say, "Hang on a second, I was on a course with you for 3 days, and you just told concepts and ideas and stories the whole time." It's like, yeah, that's a tap dance I was doing while to engage your conscious mind while we do the work.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And,
yeah, absolutely. I think I probably got that idea from you in the first place, Joseph.
it's definitely something I got from Roy. So
Yeah,
we can continue the lineage. The thing that's interesting to me, and people ask the same kind of thing. It's like I always tell people I charge a lot, $25,000 to come and spend a day with me for a 1-to-1 these days, right? And I've actually said that by the end of the year I'm going to bump that to 45 because I'm just
mm,
getting more than I want, which is always my signal to raise prices.
yeah,
So the thing that is happening is people come in, and literally the day is like this, Jamie. They come in, we have breakfast together. I meet them at near the airport, get them settled in the hotel. We go out and get a bite to eat. We chat about the weather in Florida, about what I'm doing, and they tell me about their airline flight and all these other things. And I know from having had many conversations, they assume we're going to get to what they came for.
yeah,
And then I usually go, you know what? You've been to Florida, Sarasota? And they go, no, not really. Let me show you around. So now I drive them for a couple of hours around Sarasota. We're in the car. I'm pointing out the sights on the beach and this thing and that thing. And then we have lunch because it's time to have lunch, right? So that's another 2 hours. And then we spend an hour, discussing various contemplations of the world and politics and whether Trump should or shouldn't be president and whether he's a god or Satan, doesn't matter. And we have these conversations. And then it's time for dinner. And at dinner, I say, listen, why don't you go rest in your room because you're probably tired at this point, and I'll see you tomorrow morning before you leave and get on your flight. And they're always like, well, hang on a second. When are we going to get to what I came for? I paid you all this money, and it's already
yeah,
paid up front, of course. And when are we going to talk about my thing? I go, oh yeah, you're right. Oh shit, I always do this. I always do this. You know what? Let me meet you in the morning. I'll meet you for breakfast. And if for whatever reason, it doesn't like work out in some way, listen, it's on me. You come back, no charge. I'll pick up your cost of travel and everything because it's my fault, man. You go home, take care of whatever has to happen, then we'll figure out when you can get back in town. Invariably, somewhere between 2 days and 2 weeks, I get a phone call and goes, "What the hell did you do?"
yeah,
I don't know. What are you talking about? Well, like all those things I came for that we didn't talk about, they're all like different now. What'd you do? I go, we had breakfast and I showed you around town. We had lunch. We talked about the world and we had some dinner and then you went home, right? They go, yeah, but you were doing something. I said, you were there. Why are you asking me what I did? You were there. It wasn't like there was something going on when you weren't there. It wasn't, I didn't put any magic potion in your drinks or anything, right? And they go, yeah, but you did something. I go, are you complaining? And they go, no, I'm not complaining. That's what I really want. I said, then just enjoy it. Just go live your life. You didn't come to learn what I do. You
yeah,
didn't come to absorb my skill set. You came to get what you came for. You're telling me you got it.
Mm.
And I will say almost 50% of the time, I will get notices from their significant others thanking me for whatever happened that they were
Yeah,
annoyed about, by the way, that their significant other was going to go spend 2 days out of town with this crazy guy who, when they came back, all they did was complain about. Right.
yeah.
But the point being is you create a situation in which I allow them to reveal to me how they respond to all the stuff I'm doing.
Mhm.
Then I modify how I'm interacting with them in that moment to force them to be who they say they want to be.
Yeah.
And I do that enough times in that 8 hours that we spend together, or 6 hours, or 4 hours, depending, that it becomes imprinted at the level of their nervous system. They literally don't know what's different. They literally have no idea that anything has changed. They don't even know.
Mm.
It's like everybody goes, "Oh my God, I went there and it was transformational and I changed and I had this moment, but I don't know what happened. It was like magic." I don't even want
Yeah.
that. I want them to go away annoyed that nothing.
Well, I don't have the same requirements, but I totally understand because the it's my assertion that the thing that's worth them getting is something that's a reorganization out of
Yeah.
consciousness, and uh, my process isn't quite as hardcore as yours, as you'll understand. So I I
You're
I
much
take the
kinder
step
than
of
me. I've always said that.
I yeah yeah I always have
You're
been,
much,
but
much
at the
kinder than I am.
but what I found is at the beginning of the typically it's 2 days or 3 days I'll spend with someone. At the beginning of it, I get them to write out their wish list. I go, okay, what's it going to be? And they write the wish list. Then we put it away, change the subject, explore anything but that.
Mhm.
And when we check in at the end of the second day or the beginning of the third day, they start putting lines through stuff and the things they had wanted, they don't want, things
Mhm.
that they had wanted suddenly they've got, or things that were problems aren't problems anymore, and it's because the changes happened out of consciousness.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Again,
it
nervous system
looks
update, not conscious update.
bingo. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the principles which I will forever be grateful to Sydney Banks for kind of articulating are about something that's happening out of
Mhm.
consciousness. When change happens, it happens out of consciousness, not to do with
Well, again, as I'm
conceptual.
listening to the conversation, what I'm hearing is that the way you interpret and received what Sydney offered, and Sydney may have been saying these things, but we're not going to blame Sydney either way, good or bad, is that the transformational experience happens in that space between the green and red line, so to speak,
Yeah.
in that formless space. And
Sorry, go on,
I
Joseph.
was just going to say, and thought, the word thought catches me in a way that is not necessarily representative of what you mean when you use it in that space.
Yeah, for my purposes, the word thought is referring to a spiritual formless energy
Mhm.
that's creating perceptual realities. And the other thing I'd throw in that, because I have listened to and read loads of Sid Banks' work, and for the first couple of years, none of it made any sense to me. It seemed mumbo jumbo, self contradictory. And then I heard him say something that made it all make sense. He said, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to that wisdom within. And when I realized that his entire output wasn't aimed at the personality, the intellect, the conceptual mind, he's just trying to wake something up that's already there,
Mhm.
that true self that never changes.
Right.
He's trying to dialogue with that. That made it all make sense to me.
So, the last point I'd like to inquire about, and again, out of my ignorance, and I mean that quite sincerely and humbly, is that it seems to me when I look at the work of the principles in Sydney's work, his primary drive was almost Buddhist in the sense of relieving suffering.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
And for me, it seems like it sometimes can fall short of taking them beyond suffering to a kind of abundance of the quality of life that they want to have, being able to do things in the world that generate a life worth living, not just
Yeah.
not suffering anymore.
Do you want me to comment
Yeah,
on that?
yeah, yeah.
So it seems to me that the first thing that Sid got from his own realizations and his own enlightenment experience was the relief of his suffering.
Mhm.
And what I've seen with almost every enlightened person, whatever the thing was that they were most aware of immediately before and after their big insightful experience, tends to get the headline when they're talking about it. So if it's Eckhart Tolle, he's all about the power of now. I guarantee that fucker was always in the future, in the past, before he had that insight. With Sarah Brethnock, it's all about gratitude. I don't know what she was like, but I bet she was an ungrateful,
Miserable, right?
ungrateful
So
person.
and
So
so,
people
yeah.
tend to have that contrast. But the thing that looks amazing and broadly relevant to me about Sid's work is that he articulated it as principles. Now, we've had various, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or various people over the millennia have had realizations into the stuff we've been talking about today. But SIDS happened at a time in history when we have this metaphor of scientific principles, which is a relatively recent
Sure,
metaphorical
sure.
structure. And to our earlier conversation about intuitions, there are certain things that become possible using the metaphor, working within the metaphor of principles of pre-existing facts that don't come into connection without that, specifically learning from raw data. So it certainly looks to me like realizing these principles at the level of principle are at play in every human experience. If someone's having a human experience, that experience is being experienced at the core level by who they really are and being generated from the inside out. And it looks to me like in any field of endeavor, understanding the reality of those two principles is going to help with performance, is going to help you have less on your mind, is going to help you create what you want. Now, where it gets gummy, I think, is not with the principles, but with certain concepts that get shared, like you should always be in a good feeling. It's like, well, I don't see any evidence for that. Though there's huge value in feeling good. I'm a big fan. I don't see, or like people will say things like, "Oh, well, if you don't know what to do, if you're up in your head, just wait until you calm down." Well, what if you're a fireman and you got to rush into a
Right,
burning
exactly.
building,
Right.
or it's like you got 30 seconds left in a hockey game? You can't go, "Oh, well, just give it 10
This is
minutes
my
and see how I
point.
feel." But it's not practical. But that's nothing to do with the principles. That's to do with the set of beliefs and ideas that get shared around about it. So I notice like this phrase, the three principles, A, refers to the pre existing facts as I see them that Sid Banks articulated, but it's also a modality of change work. It's also a community. It's also the beliefs and values shared by people in that
Sure, of
community.
course, always.
It's all those different things. It looks to me like it can be incredibly valuable for high performance, but it's not going to mean I don't have to go and spend time on the mat if I want to get good at jujitsu.
And
It can help
I think
me
this is a Jamie
not.
Smart thing,
Yeah,
not a
this is
Sid
well.
Banks.
This is my take. If
Right,
these are principles,
right.
then they don't. Then they're impersonal.
Right. They
They're
don't
like,
have, I get it. The principles don't have an inherent limitation that others
yeah,
might put on them. But you've also taken the principles and applied them in a more specifically generalized way to things like performance as well, which, again,
yes,
I haven't heard from the community, to use your terminology.
not so
And I
much.
find, like, if I go back to my NLP days, there was one very, very large, massive subset of NELPers, right, who were all about being able to succeed and perform and achieve, even in terms of like the sense of controlling or manipulating others to get what they want, right? That whole
Yeah,
influence and persuasion thing was a big deal in NLP. It
yeah,
still is. Still is.
yeah.
The marketers talk about NLPing people, you know?
Okay.
And when you go to Sid Banks' work and the people in the community, the people that I see most prominently pushing the three Ps, let's call it, as three Ps, all of them came from being depressed clinically, suffering. They just went through a massive trauma in their life. So they're
Mm,
all about this idea that, like, I felt like shit and now I feel good. And the three
yeah,
Ps got me there. And I think that's obviously, if somebody feels like hell and you get them to the point where they feel like they're in heaven, that's a great thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the be all and end all of what
There's
I
more
think
to
is
life than
transformation.
that.
I
Yeah.
have this
I
little
mean,
phrase. I'm going to just throw one more thing at you. I have this little phrase I use: transformation is not mastery.
mm, I agree. I agree. And so it looks to me like if these be principles, and they seem like it to me, then they should be good for every field of human endeavor, not just feeling better. Though I'm all in favor of people feeling better as
Me
well.
too. Right.
So it's I think what you're describing there is cultural rather than anything
And I hear
inherent in
you.
the principle.
And I hear you. Yeah. And I accept that. And that's again why I wanted to initiate the conversation we've had is to understand with greater clarity, if nothing else, how you're coming to it. Because I respect
Yeah,
you, and I know you don't take things, at the wisp of somebody else whispering words, so to speak.
no.
So you've gone into it. I know you thought through it, and I knew you'd be able to enlighten me on what I didn't understand and was ignorant about regarding coming to this concept. And when I put that initial phrase out, for me, the mind is a simulation, but reality is not. And to paraphrase, the only way to update your experience of it is by coming into contact with it and dealing with the feedback you get. I don't hear that kind of an idea being spoken effusively in the three P's community, right?
Well, let me throw in one piece that might be a nice place to put a bow on this. Uh, the mind is a simulation, but reality is not. But the fact that the mind is a simulation, that's a fact. And there are laws that govern
Okay,
that
sure.
simulation. And so it's my assertion that by understanding the laws that govern that situation and by coming into contact in an explicit way with the laws that govern that simulation, that itself is an interaction with reality that has its own benefits across a variety of markers.
And we could, as you put a bow on it, 100% in agreement. If you would allow me to add, and that's not the be all and end all.
No, definitely not. I'm still glad I have a place that I can go and roll on the mats.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not trusting somebody who had the update of their mental simulation to make me my next plate of pasta. I want a chef who's been
Absolutely.
in the kitchen for 20 years and has hands that know just what to do with the tomato sauce.
Bingo. Bingo. 100%. To your earlier point, transformation is not mastery, but mastery will involve multiple transformations.
Absolutely, totally.
Yeah.
And this being
Great
and the mind
conversation. Thank you
transformation may
so
be one
much.
of them.
Yeah. Thank you for reaching out, Joseph. It's a huge pleasure.
Okay, Jamie, as always, I keep saying it every time we talk to each other. I say we should do it more because it's always so beneficial for me to spend the time with you and get out of your head into my ears what you have in there. So thank you.
Well, and likewise, always a pleasure, Joseph. I
Cheers,
look
my
forward to
friend.
seeing you again soon. Take care, man.
All right, man.